I would like to welcome everybody to the New Hampshire Fish and Game Committee. We're looking forward to hearing any questions you have and being able to answer what we can. I heard that you all met already with the Federal Mid-Atlantic Fisheries Commission. With us being further north, we actually use the North Atlantic that we talk about more often, and that's a different commission, but they work the same. So it's the same sort of situation with them making federal laws that do give us governance and guidelines over the fishing in our North Atlantic oceans, whether they be international waters, federal waters, or state waters. And I guess that's all I've got. I will let the rest of my committee now introduce themselves, and then I'll introduce myself as we go by. Actually, I'll do it right now. I'm Chairman James Spillane. I represent the towns of Deerfield, Candia, and Auburn here in New Hampshire. I'm serving my 10th year, 5th term. All of us are reelected every 2 years. And I will be running for a 6th term. And with that, I'll toss it over to Representative Tudor.
Welcome. I'm Representative Tudor. I represent Rockingham 1, which includes the towns of Northwood and Nottingham. I'm in my 4th year, or my 2nd term as a state representative, and I also plan on rerunning.
Mention your DES background.
I will. Good morning, all. Welcome. My name is Carol Brown. I come from a small town in the middle of New Hampshire. I represent 2 towns with a total of maybe 4,000 constituents only. I'm in my 1st term, so this is my 2nd year. I'm a biologist by education. I worked for the state of New Hampshire in the Department of Environmental Services in hazardous waste and in wastewater treatment, and the last 15 years in oil spill response, particularly concentrating on damages to marine environments and recovery from those damages. And nice to have you all here. Welcome.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Mike Willett. I am in my 1st term here in the New Hampshire House. I live in I'm the northernmost representative in the state of New Hampshire. I live abutting the state of Vermont and very, very close to the Canadian border. Thank you.
With that, if you'd like, we can kick it off to you to ask any questions. I will tell you that we don't have a lot of impact on poaching commercially of fish in New Hampshire. We govern what we do here, just the state waters, and most of that is laws that govern the landing of fish, the landing of lobsters, crabs, and such. Regulations about what kinds of gear can be used while fishing within those state waters. Outside of the state waters, we have federal waters. Those are governed by the federal laws, not the state laws. And then beyond that, of course, is the international waters. And with that, I'll let your moderator decide who gets to ask the first questions or what's a topic of importance that one of us might be able to answer for you. That's a good question. We do not have term limits in New Hampshire because we are a volunteer legislature. We are actually 400 in number in the State House and 24 in the Senate. We also have an executive council made up of 5 and the governor himself, and all of us run every 2 years. So the entire government could turn over every 2 years. Because there's so many of us as a citizen legislature, and we are actually number 3 in size in the democratically elected English-speaking world, behind our own federal government and the House of Commons in England. That puts our representation very close to the people, and we have to do a good job or they're going to kick us out. On top of that, we have high turnover. I think about the numbers average about 1/3 of the House doesn't come back every election cycle. So it's just one of those things where at some point someone will make a decision that they are done and they don't want to run anymore because it's a lot of work to do and we only get paid $100 a year for it. And that's before taxes. So this isn't a career. We don't get paid large amounts of money for being here, and there's no incentive for us to make a career out of it. What we do simply because we want to make things better and be able to volunteer to help our state out with its governance. And I'll let each person answer in their own to the same question if anybody's got anything to add.
Question, but I mean, term limits. I really think that New Hampshire's government is representative of how the founding fathers wanted it to be set up. They wanted us to be, even at the federal level, citizen legislators who left the private sector, went and served the people for a short period of time, and then went back to the private sector. I don't think the founding fathers ever meant for Washington to become what it may have become, which is a full-time job. And so I think New Hampshire is probably very close to what our founding fathers really wanted.
Sure, I would add just a little more to what they said, and I think that this is only my second year here, but I've seen that because it's all volunteer, there's a real pride in the people that are here to serve the people of the state and as a volunteer, and it's an honor to be here, it truly is.
I agree, it is an honor, but it is a tremendous commitment. A lot of the representatives live quite a ways away. As myself, it's almost 3 hours driving time to come here. And so you have to be dedicated. At the same time, you have to be looking at the big picture that you really want to help your constituents and do what's right for your area. So it is, we take a lot of pride in what we do.
I am Udi Baki Kuruma from the Civil Society Organization of Sierra Leone. Now the question I would like to ask about this, the election of this legislative. In a situation where in the American politics is being navigated by 2 political parties like the Democrats and the Republicans, how do you go about the election of your local legislations? Is it on partisan basis or what?
I'm not sure I caught all of that.
Basically, is a local legislature election on a partisan basis to the federal side.
Yes. So it is, and when this House finishes its elections, there will be a certain number of the House members who are Democrats and a certain number who are Republicans. We're not showing you that division right now because everyone who showed up today here is Republican. But currently our House is evenly divided. We only have a majority of about 3 Republicans at the moment. So all of these committees are set up to represent the entire body in numbers. So my committee has 10 Republicans and 10 Democrats on it. That makes up the 20 that sit here normally to do our committee work. When we look at laws, they may be submitted by either side. What we're looking at is what's best for the state. Sometimes politics plays into that. This committee, not so much, because we are less of a controversial or or very partisan committee. When we make a decision on a law, it's typically because it's having to do with the management of our wildlife, and both sides usually agree on that. And so other things that we deal with in the House can be very partisan. The laws, as they come forward, can be very slanted one side or the other, and then you get fights over them. But I think that this committee is one where typically you get more of a discussion over people who might be more leaning towards anti-hunting, anti-fishing, more animal rights versus people who are hunters and fishermen and looking out for the fishing industry and our hunting, tourism, and that sort of thing. So that tends to be the conservationist and animal rights versus the sportsman's rights and commercial rights. And I think I would leave it there and see if anybody else has something to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think that today, because we are so close in numbers, we are more partisan and maybe, or nonpartisan, I should say, than maybe we normally are. Because in order to get any legislation through, we have to work together. There's no way one side can rule the House and say this is the way it's going to be, because we don't have the numbers to do that. And so to some extent, this creates, an even House creates a nonpartisan environment, because just you have to have that in order to legislate. When we have a stronger majority, we might be tend to be more partisan, because we don't need the other side to pass legislation.
One thing I found being on the committee, it's very, very interesting. Like myself, I live up north, I live in the mountains. And being part of this committee, I've got a great education on how our seacoast works and our commercial fishermen, which I've never had any exposure to. So as we work together, it's very interesting. It's still very educational.
Very quickly, I would add that there is an independent party, a third party. It's for those people that don't want to be over here or over here, and they kind of in the middle more of the times. It's a very small number of people, and they don't really have much sway as a group. I don't even know how many we have, 3 or 4 maybe.
I think currently we only have 2 or 3.
Okay. So there is that option to be a third party, but it's generally not going to get you anywhere to do that.
And when we run for election, I will say that there has not been success in this state for people to run as a third party and get elected. Everyone who is currently an independent in the House became that after they were already elected, and they just decided they didn't want to be part of either party anymore. They dropped out of the other parties and declared that they were independent. When we run for re-election, which is coming up very soon, we sign up as either a Republican or a Democrat. You could sign up as an independent, but whenever someone's done that in the past, they don't end up getting enough votes, and they don't end up in the House. So we do have a situation here where those small numbers of people who are independent tend to run as one party or the other, and then declare that they're independent once they're here.
Ok. Je parle français. Parfait. Bonjour tout le monde, c'est Capitaine Aïssatou Diagne. Je suis de la gendarmerie chargée de la protection de l'environnement au Sénégal. La question que je vais leur poser, c'est pour savoir s'ils ont un dispositif pour contraindre les politiques à appliquer les lois dont eux, ils décident. Parce que le cas au Sénégal, on peut facilement voter une loi, mais au moment de l'appliquer, on nous demande de ne pas choisir entre la protection de l'environnement et le développement. Donc, ce qui devient difficile pour nous en tant qu'agents d'application de la loi. Merci.
Thank you for that question. That's a good one. We did not actually mention yet our Department of Fish and Game and Marine Resources, which is what we're here to actually do. Our entire focus of this committee is to shape, renew, abolish, if needed, the laws that they work to enforce. So the Department of Fish and Game and Marine Resources is made up of people who deal with the licensing aspect, but then also those enforcement officers. And we have enforcement on our seacoast, where they enforce our laws regarding commercial fishing, commercial crab and lobster, and then also the sportsman fishing on the seacoast. On the mainland and up in the mountains, we have a lot of enforcement officers that deal with hunting, whether it be big game, small game, the use of all-terrain vehicles, four-wheelers and snowmobiles and other things that we use to drive, because those are not on a road. They're not enforced by the police. They're enforced by the fish and game officers. So any laws that we've put in place that govern how those vehicles can be operated on trails, in woods, fields, etc., are enforced by that department. So our fish and game department is extensive, but we obviously need more people than we have, because we have a lot of land mass in New Hampshire, and I'm not sure what the current number is. One of these guys might be able to pitch in with it, but we have a number of fish and game officers on staff now that are spread out around the state, some of them dealing only with those inland areas. I forgot to mention, inland we have fishing in the lakes, so they're also not just doing the hunting in the trails, but they're doing the freshwater fishing as opposed to the marine fishing in the ocean. Then we've got our boats and our crews out on the ocean that are doing the enforcement and the checking when a commercial boat comes in to make sure they're complying with laws, etc. And of course, some of what we enforce on our seacoast for that commercial is governed by federal law. So they're working under both state law and federal law when they are working with that. And with that, I'll pass it along again.
Yeah, I would just add that though Fish and Game takes the lead on that enforcement, any of our law enforcement officers, whether that be state police, local police, or sheriffs, have the power to enforce those laws as well. So if they were to see something that they thought was amiss, they could notify Fish and Game and hold those people until Fish and Game arrived to make the final decision on whether or not they had broken a regulation or a law.
I believe our current number of conservation officers in the field right now is 46, and they're looking to increase it by a few. One thing that they do that doesn't get a lot of accolades is hiking in the mountains is very, very good sport, and we have a lot of people from southern New England that come, hundreds of thousands of people throughout the year, and they lead up all rescue and lost hiker rescues at no charge as part of their program. So it's a big part of the safety part of it, and we're very lucky we have them.
Listening to you. I was told, I think, that you have met federal representatives from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, from NOAA, and from the U.S. Coast Guard. So NOAA does not have an enforcement branch, but the Coast Guard, as you know, has an enforcement branch, and they are responsible for certain issues on the coast. By federal law, they're responsible for environmental issues, oil spills, hazardous waste spills within a certain distance of the shoreline. The New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services, so I'm sure that you all have slightly different breakdowns of the jurisdictions that are enforced. The New Hampshire Department of Environmental Services handles water quality, illegal discharges to rivers and streams and to the ocean and that type of thing. But we do not have an environmental police. They have to follow those up with civil, basically, court actions to manage that. So the Coast Guard is our, basically, they obviously have a law enforcement capability.
Oui, merci. Je suis Clovis Niamamouketou du Gabon. J'aimerais savoir si les deux principaux partis politiques ont des divergences sur les questions d'exploitation des ressources, aussi bien halieutiques que les ressources synergétiques, donc la chasse et tout ça. Première question. Voilà. Et la deuxième question, c'est pour les crevettes, pour le cas spécifique des crevettes. Est-ce qu'elles sont pêchées avec des chalutiers? Et est-ce qu'il y a une législation précise concernant les chalutiers qui doivent pêcher ces crevettes? Merci.
So to recap the question, because you didn't get to hear it, and I'm sorry for not doing that last time. He's wondering about the breakdown of the parties and if the political parties have, if they contest and argue over the allocation of the resources for the fishing and that type of thing. And for example, shrimp comes in underneath the fishing, and do we have specific laws that deal with the taking of shrimp and things like that? So I think I caught all of it. We do tend to have a breakdown in the political parties for some of what gets allocated for the laws that this committee is responsible for. As I said, we tend to be a fairly bipartisan party. But if you had to break it down, I think that the Republican Party you would find is more pro-business, trying to take and be behind those commercial fisheries and fishermen to make sure they can make a living and make the best use of our resource for commercial purposes and for business purposes so that people have a livelihood and an income. On the Democrat side, they would tend to break down more on the animal rights issues, the restriction on commercial fishing, the restriction on methods of fishing to make it more fair for the animal being caught, and less concern about the actual industry. And I would sum it up that way, I think, on the breakdown. So if we have a law, for example, that might come forward, that says we're going to restrict the way that somebody can fish for bluefish off of our coastline, it might get a little contentious between parties because you might have the Democrat side saying they want to protect the bluefish and they're going to restrict the use of certain types of nets, whereas we would be saying, what's the evidence that there's any harm being done by these nets? We want to protect the industries that are depending on those bluefish to be brought in. And it's a balancing act. We want to try to protect, of course, the resource, because without the resource, there won't be an industry in the future. But at the same time, we don't want to so restrict the industry that they cannot make a living doing it. We don't have a shrimp industry up this far north. To the best of my knowledge, the shrimp are more of a warm water species. We have Maine lobster. I don't know if you guys have been able to have any lobster while you were here, but Maine lobster is a different species than that southern lobster that they have down in Florida and whatnot, and it's much better. It's a cold water species. We also have crab, but to the best of my knowledge, there's no shrimp industry up here. And I hope I caught enough answer for everything there, but I will pass it along now.
I hope that I'm answering your question, but if there is contention and, let's say, Fish and Game Committee comes to agreement and we pass it out of committee, and then we bring it to the House floor, there may be disagreement there. And so even there that we managed to get agreement and we pass it through the House, it then has to go to the Senate. And there's 24 senators who have to agree that it's a good law. And when they pass it, it then goes to the governor. And he has to sign it, or he can veto it and stop the law as well. So there's quite a few steps to actually get a law onto the books. And then if the governor does veto it, we have the ability to override his veto, but it takes a much larger vote than the simple majority.
Representative Ouellette?
When we talk about politics and contention, it always seems to be the factor of money that's involved. Now, Fish and Game Department in the state of New Hampshire is self-funded through the hunters and fishermen's licenses. It takes very, very little state money to run this department. The hunters and fishermen support this department, fund it. So the department has an obligation, of course, to do what's best to manage their wildlife and fish, but at the same time to work with conservation to make sure that the natural resources are well protected.
Okay, that's an easy one. When we run for reelection, if we get reelected, we get sworn in January of the next year. So for example, this summer, we will be running elections. In November, we will have those elections. In December, this term of the current members ends. And in January, we start a brand new term with all the new members sworn in. And at that point, when they're sworn in, they get a check for $200 to cover their 2 years. You don't get anything extra for the committee. You do get reimbursed for mileage to drive here. So someone like Representative Ouellette, who's driving 3 hours, gets a larger amount of money because he has to spend it all to get down here. And we do have some special situations where there's some discounts at the local hotels. So if we had a lot of days in a row, Representative Ouellette might decide he's going to stay here rather than drive all the way back and forth. And part of his mileage could cover his hotel stay to make sure he's here for all of our time. So there's no extra for being in the committee. The Speaker of the House gets an extra $50, and the President of the Senate gets an extra $50. But the Senate and the House are both paid the same. Even though there's only 24 of them and there's 400 of us, we all only earn that $100 a year, and that's before they take the taxes out.
My next question is, what are the prosecution powers of the committee? Or, to put it better, how do you work with other law enforcement agencies to bring offenders to?
We don't have prosecution powers in the committee. Fish and Game has prosecution powers, and their prosecution powers are the same as any other law enforcement officer in the state. In fact, they take the same training, they graduate from the same courses. It's just a different department for them to go into, where they then specialize in the huge amount of laws that we have for Fish and Game. In fact, Rep. Tudor, do you think you can grab one of our Fish and Game books from the office so we can show them how thick the law book is? They specialize in learning every law regarding commercial and recreational fishing, hiking, four-wheeling, everything that's in there. They specialize on that after they've decided to become part of that department. but they undergo the same basic training and they have the same prosecution ability, the same arresting ability, and then our regular court system handles it just as they do anything else. We don't have a special court system either. You can pass that around and let everybody take a look at that. And so at that point now, I'll let Representative Ouellette answer.
As far as the prosecution, Representative Spillane is correct. Fish and Game themselves, the department does that. We have no power. But if there's something that changes in the industry or in the sport and they need new laws to do prosecution and to handle their job, that's where they come to us to say, hey, we need this law changed. They'll bring it to us as a committee. We'll look at it, maybe change it, maybe not, vote on it, take it to the floor, and try to get the law changed to give them the tools to do the job that they need.
And I can add on to that by giving you some examples that we just did this year. So this year, the federal government made a change last December on the issuance of waterfowl hunting stamps. Now, in the United States, migratory waterfowl are governed by the federal laws, not a state law, because they travel across many states. So the federal law governs all hunting of them and what laws can be in place. We have state laws that mimic those federal laws so that they're enforceable within our state, but they're the ones who tell us what it has to be for those. So one of the things they do with federal waterfowl is, in order to fund their program, they force everybody who plans to hunt them to buy a tax stamp. And it used to be for many years, well, for as long as the program's been in place until last year, you got a physical stamp that you had to sign your name across and carry with you while you were hunting waterfowl. And last December, the federal government decided we're going to go with electronic ones that just get sent to your phone and you just have to show them the stamp on your phone. And our law said you had to sign that stamp and carry it with you. So we had to change our law because they couldn't enforce the federal law with the way our law was written. And they couldn't enforce our law when the federal law said, we're not giving you a stamp anymore. People would have no stamp. So we had to pass that one. And that was, again, there was no partisan issue there. Everybody agreed we've got to do this so that we are in line and it can be enforced. And that's just one example.
In my first term here, I've been very pleased with the demeanor of all of the representatives that come here to Concord. Occasionally you have an issue, but what you don't see here is what you see on CNN or any other major network about the challenging hearings that happen in the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate. We don't challenge people here. We don't fight with anyone that's sitting at this table. We're here to listen. And I'm really pleased that that's how it works in New Hampshire. One of the things that we can do as members is we generally have direct contact with a head of an agency. So the director of Fish and Game or the commissioner of an agency. So although we don't have prosecutorial powers, we do have the ability to pass our constituents' concerns directly to the head of an agency and maybe have it taken care of more quickly for them.
Bonjour. Je vais parler en français. I will speak in French. My name is Jihan. I'm from Morocco. Pardon. Je m'appelle Jihan. Je viens du Maroc. Je suis cadre à la direction de contrôle des activités de la pêche maritime dans le département des pêches maritimes au Maroc. Alors ma question c'est combien du temps il vous faut pour avoir une proposition, pour avoir un accord avec toutes les entités, pour renouveler un texte de loi, parce que Pour le cas du Maroc, lorsque le département propose un texte d'arrêté ou bien de loi avec l'entité qui s'en charge, c'est le secrétariat général du gouvernement. Les négociations peuvent traîner même 2 ans ou 3 ans pour avoir un accord final. Alors, je ne sais pas, c'est quoi le cas pour vous? Est-ce que le traitement il est rapide ou bien c'est lent ou comment vous organisez ça?
Another really great question. And I'm going to explain the difference between rules and laws. What's in the law book that you saw has rules and laws. Our Department of Fish and Game and Marine Resources, the director of that department, has the ability to do certain things under rules, which happen much faster than passing a law. And we gave him that ability because we have so many things that change constantly as far as hunting seasons, fishing seasons, the number of fish that can be taken. These things happen fast, and it might take a lot longer for a law to get passed than the rule can be changed. So within the Fish and Game Department, the director may get biological data from his employees that says we need to decrease the number of trout being taken this year in our freshwater areas because we've had a decrease in their numbers and we don't want people to take too many. Or it could be something where the federal government has decided that we can't take as many of a certain type of fish off our shoreline. Or we may have even decided we need to decrease the number of lobsters being taken. It can also work with game, such as right now we have a large and ever-increasing population of turkeys. So very recently they have changed the rules for the turkey hunting season to allow you to take 2 turkeys this spring instead of just 1 like you could in the past. And you can still hunt 1 turkey in the fall, but they've decided that there's so many they need to take more of them if they can, so they're letting people hunt more of them. Many years ago, the turkey was endangered, so you weren't allowed to take any at all. So we've had a very successful program of bringing the turkey back, so successful now that they are just everywhere. And we're going to be trying to balance that out by allowing them to be taken more. So a rule is governed entirely by the director and the Fish and Game Commission, which is a group of appointed by the governor, members from all around the state. I think there's 11 of them.
I think so.
11 members sit on this commission. They represent districts up north where Rep. Ouellette is. They represent districts down here where I am. And there's a special one, the number 11, is Seacoast only, that governs fisheries and things on the seacoast. So every area gets representation on the Fish and Game Commission. So when the director goes to set rules, the commission votes on that. And if the commission representing all of the state agrees, there's 2 public hearings on it somewhere in the state. The public gets to have an input, but then all of that stuff is set down into the rules, and that makes up for the next hunting and fishing season so that it's done every year. Any major changes go through that process. We don't have to take care of that in law because it just wouldn't get done. But we have to shape the laws that overall govern the Fish and Game Department and the commission, such as, and with our laws, we're able to override the commission. So if the commission doesn't think something is a good idea, we can pass a law that says we don't care, we want to do it anyway. An example of that would be a law I passed 4 or so years ago that allowed the use of a crossbow for hunting during the muzzleloader season when you were only supposed to use muzzle-loading rifles. There was no impact to anything except that it gave people a different option to use. But the commission was opposed to it. They didn't want to allow it. And we passed the law through the House and the Senate, and the governor signed it. So now it's a law. They have to craft rules to follow that law. And that took longer to do. It can take an entire year or maybe both years in a session, or in a term, I should say. And so it could take 1 or 2 years. Typically, if something goes longer than 2 years, you're now into a new elective cycle. So everything could get turned upside down and it may not go anywhere. So we try to get everything done, if it's a law, within 1 or 2 years. But those rules can happen very quickly. And anybody else have anything to add to that? Mike?
Just one more thing. When we talk about the Fish and Game Department, you know, we've mentioned a lot about law enforcement, but they've got a whole section in their department of just biologists who are studying our animal habitat and our fisheries and give recommendations on the laws and what should be changed and what we need to do to protect them.
Yeah, the biologists are the ones who give the scientific data guidance to the rulemaking and the lawmaking when it comes to questions about what we should do to best preserve the habitat for the species, to preserve the species, whether it be ocean habitat, lakes, mountains. We have a wide variety of biologists who are constantly studying that. And that can even impact things such as housing development, logging for timber. All of these things might have an impact that then has to be studied before the decision can be made by those biologists.
Merci beaucoup. Je suis Jonathan Luneyo Kambale. Je suis commandant de la police Lakis au Nord Kivu, président Gouma. Je suis commissaire supérieur de la police nationale congolaise à la République démocratique du Congo. J'ai une question qui a des sous-branches. Je suis direct. Vous êtes la Chambre des représentants. Et traditionnellement, la Chambre des représentants a le rôle de dicter des lois et de faire des contrôles parlementaires. Alors, je voulais savoir, contrairement à mon pays, tel que le collègue a posé la question par rapport aux démocrates républicains qui composent même la Chambre. Je voulais savoir comment vous effectuez les contrôles parlementaires ici aux États-Unis, surtout à New Hampshire. Dans le domaine, surtout de la pêche, surtout, supposons que le ministère dans lequel, ou soit le département dans lequel vous allez mener les contrôles parlementaires, il serait de votre camp, soit démocrate, soit républicain. Parce que dans notre pays, ça pose toujours problème. Même s'il y aurait de difficultés de fonctionnement des ministères donnés et que ce serait des cas de la majorité parlementaire, par exemple, ça serait difficile qu'une motion de censure ou soit de défiance soit votée et que ces ministres-là puissent partir. Donc il y a toujours des blocages par rapport à ça. Je voulais savoir maintenant, à votre niveau, comment vous faites ça? Merci.
That one's a complicated one, but we'll get to it. Yes. So, we don't have a ministry or a parliament. In the United States, we are a representative republic. That means that we are a republic that's brought together by a whole bunch of states who agreed to enter into this republic. The federal government governs overarching laws, defense of the nation as a whole, but a lot of power is invested in each individual state. Within the states, some of us run a little differently, but we all follow the same way without a parliament or without a ministry. Every single position in our state government is elected on its own. So it doesn't matter if the governor is Republican or Democrat. That governor got elected, and that's his party or her party. The same is true with the Executive Council, which is a check on the balance of the governor. The governor cannot do everything that governor wants unless the five members of the Executive Council agree with him, a majority of them. For example, appointing someone to be Director of Fish and Game. He may make an appointment of someone to be the director of this department, but the Executive Council has to look at that, have a hearing on that, and agree with him, or else it doesn't happen. In the Senate and the House, we are a bicameral legislative body. We are equal but separate. The senators have districts that overlap ours, so the same people who are voting for us are voting for a senator and a governor and an Executive Council member. They may not all be from the same party, but we have to work together if we're going to get things done. So, for example, in my district, I have 3 towns I cover. In my hometown of Deerfield, my senator that runs in my district, his district is one area, so currently that would be Senator Pearl. In the next town over that I also represent, Candia, I have a different Senate district overlaps that, so I've got Senator Murphy there. And in my third town, I have yet another Senate district because I live in a complicated area, and I have Senator Carson over there. All 3 of them happen to be Republicans, but it doesn't have to be that way. One of the towns could have elected me as a Republican, but elected a Democrat as the senator. And so everything is elected at its own level, and the way that things move through our body to get done is that first we write what's called a bill, which is an idea for a law, in the House or the Senate. All tax bills, spending and money bills need to originate by law in the House, not the Senate. Because they're closer to the people, we have much more of a direct interaction because there's 400 of us rather than 24. There's one of us for every 3,500 people in the state. So they figured money has to be close to the people. We're not going to let you tax people unless they have a very direct say. So we propose a bill. It comes to a committee like this. We have a public hearing in this committee where the makeup is split between Republicans and Democrats based on how the election went. Members of the public and special interests and department heads can all come in and testify to us on the bill. We listen to them. We will at a later time have discussions among the committee members on what we've heard from testimony and make a vote. If we decide that that bill should proceed on, it goes to the House floor with an ought to pass, or we think it's good motion. If we think it shouldn't go forward, it goes to the House floor with a ITL, which means inexpedient to legislate, or we shouldn't pass it motion. I'm simplifying this a little bit, but once it passes the House, it still has to go to the Senate. And the Senate will bring it in front of a committee on their side like this, where they will hear from the public and the department heads and everybody. They will make their discussions and determination, and then it goes to the Senate floor. If it passes the Senate floor, and it's the same as the bill passed the House, it goes to the governor. The governor can choose to sign it or not, and that's how you have to go through to get the legislation done and how we have to all work together. Anything that started in the Senate as a bill still has to come to the House, and we have to pass it before it goes to the governor. So we're equal bodies, we just represent different areas of the state with different numbers, and we still have to work together. And so there's no parliament. I would say for us, the parliament, well, like in England, they have the parliament and the House of Commons, right? House of Lords and the House of Commons make up the parliament. That's it. So for your terminology, parliament equals legislature. The House of Lords would be the Senate, and the House of Commons would be those of us in the House. And we don't elect a speaker based on coalition of parties, but we do have a vote for who's going to run each of those bodies. It's typically the majority who had seats in that body will elect their person to run that body. So this term, we had slightly more Republicans, and we elected Speaker Packard to be our Speaker of the House. In the Senate, they had slightly more Republicans, and they elected Senator Jeb Bradley to be the President of the Senate. And those two people are in charge of keeping everybody in order, keeping everything running, the Speaker on the House side and the Senate President on the Senate side. And they're the ones who instill order and decorum and agenda. Anything to add? Sure.
As Representative Spillane said, in the House, our Speaker of the House was elected a gentleman named Sherman Packard. When I was first elected to the House, we had the election, and I was very much surprised that he was elected overwhelmingly with a lot of Democrats voting for this Republican Speaker. And that just showed that how much respect there is for people who work together.
So I believe I've translated your question from listening to the chairman's answer to you. In the history of the United States, the idea of the House at the federal level, the House of Representatives and the Senate was similar to English Parliament in many ways, the House of Lords and the House of Commons. The thought was, in the founding of the country, that the House of Representatives was more of the common man, the farmer, the worker, and they tended to be maybe a little more controversial, rough around the edges, controversial, and the senators were always supposed to be those that were higher bred and could control themselves, and they could kind of temper what the House of Representatives did. We have grown far from that at this point, and basically the House of Representatives and the Senate are people from all walks of life at this point. Although some of those in certain positions do think they're better than others still in this day and age, but.
Yeah, and just quickly, there are times when the House sends a bill to the Senate after we have approved it, and the Senate changes it. It then has to come back to the House, and we vote to either concur with their change, to, no, we're not interested in what you've done, non-concur, or we can ask for a committee of conference where we will get together and try to work out a compromise to pass the bill. So that's the other part of it.
Yes. Now, again, Woody Kuroma again from Sierra Leone. Now, looking at the illegal, unreported, and unregulated fisheries activities that has now posed a threat towards the management of our fisheries resources, I want to know in the first place, how does this state take note of the mesh size, the area where people do the fisheries activities, and the method they use to fish? That is one. Then secondly, which policies are you using? Do you have open access to these resources, or you have restrictive measures that you put in place? Like for my country, it's an open access. Everybody can come today and do fishing without any restriction. Then the last thing, talking about food security, how this sector contributes toward food security. Now, we know the artisanal, which are the small-scale fishers, their contribution towards this particular aspect of food security. which policies do you have at state level to subsidize these people, whether yearly or at any time you wish?
I'm going to do my best here. We have, when it comes to restrictions for fishing or for anything else, that's all done through licensing and permitting. So we do control, because the federal government also wants control over the fisheries and the resource. There was a time 12 or 15 years ago when anybody from New Hampshire could go and throw a fishing line into the ocean and fish with no license needed, because the ocean was different. If they wanted to do it in freshwater, they needed a license or a permit, but not the ocean. But the federal government wanted us to start restricting more of that. So now you need to buy a fishing license even to fish in the ocean. We have multiple aspects of that. You have what we consider sport fishermen, which is fishing for your own use. It may not really be sport, it may be for your food, but you're fishing for your own use, you're not selling it. And then we have commercial fishermen who are fishing because they're bringing it in to sell it. They're licensed differently and they're monitored and controlled differently. There's much less regulation around a sport fisherman because they're taking in less fish. But there's still restrictions on types of gear that can be used. Some of these things come down from federal law, such as no use of gill nets, and the types of lobster traps that can be used and what must be on them for safety equipment to let the lobsters be able to escape if the trap is abandoned. That kind of thing is set up in our law to mirror what the federal government said they needed to have done. There's no ability to have completely open access. You can't just go out and start catching fish or hunting animals without a license, with the exception of if you own a bunch of land, you can hunt on your own property, but you're still subject to the limits of the law in the state, such as I can still only take one deer in the season if I take it on my property. I just don't have to pay for the deer tag and license. I can use a tag that's free to take my deer and tag it. That doesn't extend to things like hunting bear or turkey. I would still have to buy those tags. I can't hunt them free on my own land because those are a differently managed resource. So I would say overall, that thick book that was going around is full of restrictions that prevent you from being able to just freely go out and fish or hunt as needed. And so hunting and fishing doesn't tie into our state's food security. Food security in the state is governed more by the state. When somebody has a food insecurity in their family, they apply for state aid and they get vouchers to be used to purchase groceries and food, with the state tax dollars helping to subsidize them to supplement their food security. We don't just say, here's a hunting license, go out and get something. We give them a voucher to a grocery store and they go through it that way. I think that was pretty much everything that you were asking about, but I'll pass it along as well.
All of our fishermen, especially in the freshwater, all have to have a license. And it's amazing that they take great pride in following the laws, because we know that the license money goes to help support the sport and the fisheries. When someone is out there breaking the law, over limits, not having a license, there's a lot of social and pressure to get these guys caught, because the hunters and fishermen really take a lot of pride in being the conservationists of the state.
So to clarify, our Fish and Game law enforcement officers, they do have arrest capability. and if necessary, they can arrest on site. However, and they're allowed to walk up to you and say, show me your license and let me look in your fish bag and see what you have and tell me how you caught that. They have the right by law to do that, and they can pull your license, and they can, at the minimum, send you home and say you can't fish anymore. But so they do have the authority to enforce laws in the field. But as Representative Willett said, I think that the community of fishing game users takes a lot of pride in making sure that we protect the resource, that everyone is involved in that.
Yeah, and I'm not sure I really caught the question, but I will add, based on the answers, that as a landowner, I'm allowed to post my property and make it so that you can't hunt on it or fish on it. Most New Hampshire landowners do not do that. They leave their property open for the public to come and hunt. There's a program called Current Use where the state gives me a little bit of break on my taxes on the property for allowing recreational use of my property to the residents of the state.
And that brings me into a good point that I should explain about how our state property works, because this is important. We're very different from some of the other states in the Midwest of the United States and such. Here in New England, in the Northeast of the United States, we have, since colonial times, always been working under the guidance of communal property. So although I own property, everybody who takes and does recreation of hiking, walking, fishing, or hunting can go on any other property without permission, as long as it's not posted by the landowner that says they don't want someone on it. All of the land is open to use in New Hampshire for all people, unless it's specifically posted by the landowner that you can't go on it. So, and as Representative Tudor said, in order to encourage more of that use, if you've got a large property of land, a large amount of property or land, you can get a break on your taxes, an extra 15% discount on your taxes, if you leave it open to all recreations and don't post it. That is something that's been highly guarded and respected here, because it means that you don't have to actually sign a lease with someone to be able to go and hunt or or fish on their property. It's open to everybody to use. And as such, every person here in the state feels like we have a shared interest in all the resources. So we're all conserving them because they apply to all of us. Anybody else have anything to add on to that part of it? No? All right. So that's how we run our shared property values. In the Midwest, if I was going to go hunting somewhere, their default is you can't hunt on anyone else's property unless you have written permission, whether it's posted or not. So if I go out there for a hunting trip, I've got to actually pay someone money and sign a lease with them for permission to use their land to hunt or fish on. And in our area up here in the Northeast, we follow a different model, and it's the Northeast model of land management that allows for shared use of the land unless a particular landowner says keep out. Go ahead.
Just an example of how expansive this open permission is. In the state of New Hampshire, there's over 5,000 miles of snowmobile trails, with over 80% of it on private land. So it's open to everyone through the winter.
And quickly, it might be worth adding, in this new technology that we are in, those conversations have become a little more complicated because people have been putting their personal trail cameras out on other people's property that they are allowed to hunt on. And the property owners have been saying, oh, wait a minute, now you're taking pictures of me and my wife and my children on my land, and I don't want you to do that. So we had a bill come through last year that we had to deal with that. So that has put a little bit of a wrinkle in this open access discussion.
That's a good example of where the progress made in technology caused us to have to implement a new law. Because nobody wants someone coming out and putting an automatic camera on their own property that can take pictures without their permission or knowledge that it's there. So we had to implement a specific hunting regulation that says that you can't go and put a camera on someone else's property without their permission. And if you do put it out there, that permission only lasts 1 year. You got to get new permission next year. You can't just do it all the time. And on your own property, though, you can put one out and keep it all you want because it's yours. So.
Just
Ok, je peux aller? Ah. Merci beaucoup. Il y a eu une zone d'ombre lorsque vous avez répondu à ma question. C'est là où je voulais répliquer. Les collègues ont automatiquement pris la parole. Donc, vous avez explicité quelque chose en disant, oui, vous n'êtes pas un parlement, mais les autorités gouvernementales ne peuvent pas faire ce qu'ils veulent dans la gestion de la chose publique. Alors, je voulais savoir, à votre niveau, en tant que représentant du peuple, quels sont les types de mécanismes de garde-fous, les types de garde-fous que vous mettez en œuvre pour empêcher ces animateurs du gouvernement, ou soit par exemple le maire de la ville, pour qu'il ne puisse pas faire ce qu'il veut dans la gestion de la chose publique. Une autre question, c'était par rapport à la communauté locale, quoi. Vous êtes représentant du peuple et tout ce que vous devez faire ici, c'est au profit du peuple. Je vais être direct dans le cadre de la pêche. D'une part, c'est cette communauté-là que vous représentez qui viole les lois. Et maintenant, je veux savoir comment vous parvenez à concilier vos plaidoyers au niveau du gouvernement à faveur de cette population-là, ce peuple-là qui viole les lois que vous avez dictées dans l'application sur terrain. Disons, en fait, c'était par rapport au gouvernement fédéral et l'État fédéré. Dans votre introduction, vous avez dit il y a certaines matières dont la compétence revient exclusivement au gouvernement central. Alors, vous, en tant que chambre législative au niveau de l'État fédéré, comment vous parvenez à concilier le texte de loi, tel que vous avez dit qu'il y a une différence entre une loi et un règlement? Est-ce que la loi qui est votée au niveau fédéral, pour qu'elle soit mise en application dans votre État, comment vous procédez? Est-ce qu'il y a un règlement que vous édictez pour interpréter cette loi fédérale? Ou soit vous l'exécutez dans son entièreté? Comment vous faites pour que ça puisse être réconcilié avec ce qui se passe sur le terrain dans votre État? Merci beaucoup.
Okay, so the question is basically multiples. The first one was what checks and balances are in place to ensure that agencies cannot do whatever they want to violate those people we represent. And the second part was how do we reconcile, when we're representing a community, what if our community is breaking the law? How do we reconcile that? And we mentioned that the federal government sometimes mandates something, but we have a different opinion. Have we had to pass legislation that is in conflict with the federal law, and how do we manage that? It's a very complicated one, but it's a good question. I will start out by saying that we are representing our communities to the state, from the local level to the state, but we also elect people that represent the state down in the federal government. And so this whole process, this chain of representative government is something that in America, everybody adopts and buys into. And for the most part, it's one of those things where if a majority of the people have elected a certain person to represent them, then we expect them to do the best that they can for everyone in the community. And we realize that we might be a minority of that and we might not get what we want. As for the checks and balances, we have, as representatives, direct contact with the department heads of the agencies. If we hear that some of our constituents are suffering an injustice from an agency, we can escalate to the director of that agency. And if we don't get satisfaction there, we can always escalate to the governor because he appoints and governs all of those agencies. When it comes down to it, every agency in the state is reporting to the governor and the executive council. So we don't typically have an issue where an agency is abusing a community or doing what they want in a community, but we do have expectations that we've put into law on how agencies should behave. And if they violate those expectations, we do have methods to escalate to someplace who, at the end, the governor could remove the director of that agency for not keeping his agency in line. And even if it went far enough, could press charges and prosecute the director of the agency for violating his contract under the law with the state. The second half of the question, with representing our communities and whether we have conflicts with federal government, yes, frequently we have found ourselves at odds with what the federal government, but it's one of those things that changes depending on who the administration is for the most part. I'll say one of the most blatant examples really doesn't have anything to do with Fish and Game, but some states within the United States have decided that they don't like the federal prohibition on use of marijuana, and they have implemented local state laws, and they have said, we as a state don't care if the federal government said we can't do it. We're going to do it anyway because we're not going to enforce the law here in the state. Now, they're called that legalization, but it's typically, it's really not legalization. What it is refusal to prosecute and refusal to arrest by the state. So the federal government, if they want to enforce it, is now at the point where they have to send federal agents in and use federal law enforcement officers to enforce something. And to be frank, there's not enough federal law enforcement officers to enforce laws like that in every state. So if a state comes forward like Colorado has done and like Oregon has done and California and says we're not going to prosecute people for having marijuana and using it, the federal government is at that point stuck with only prosecuting and working against crimes of that if it's big enough to attract their attention. The average person on the street, they just don't have the manpower to do it. We had a bill a while back that was another good example when there was a fear that the federal government might implement some form of gun control by executive order that would take away our gun rights in the state. We in New Hampshire passed a New Hampshire law that said none of our law enforcement in the state will enforce any federal ban on firearms that goes against our Second Amendment right in our Constitution. And so any such attempt to try to restrict firearms within our state would require the federal government to send in their own army of people because our law enforcement were going to be on our side. They would be defending our right to keep those guns. And that passed and was signed as well. I think I got everything, but I'm going to let other people pitch in here. Representative Ouellette.
The gentleman asked if you had a local law enforcement that was really running roughshod over the community, how would you deal with it? If I'm a fisherman and I don't think I'm treated right, have a ticket, my next step is to go to the local court. The court judge there is nonpartisan and follows the law. And if you don't like it, you can always appeal. But there's a check and balance to keep that law enforcement guy intact. One thing that Representative Spillane said, that we all have the ability to go to the commissioners and the directors of these departments and air our griefs. But the bottom line is we control their funding, so they listen pretty well.
That's true. We can take away their money, and then they have no money to get paid to operate if they don't listen to us.
And just quite at a higher level, the way the states and the federal government are supposed to work is defined in the United States Constitution. The Constitution is really the highest document that tells us what rights we have as citizens versus what rights the government has. And in that Constitution is the 10th Amendment, which says that all things not referenced in the Constitution are left for the states to decide. There's great debate as to how that works, but that's really at the highest level where the state gets its power from, and the ability to govern itself.
Sure.
Ok, merci beaucoup.
There are certainly times when state agencies are conducting themselves in a way that people don't agree with. I think a simple example outside of Fish and Game is there are those that believe maybe our environmental agency is allowing too simplified of a process to site a new landfill, which is a very hot topic about where do you put your waste. So there are those that believe that they're acting in concert in some ways with the industry to site new landfills, which we haven't found any direct evidence for, but you bring that forward as a check and balance. That's not something you would take to court necessarily, but it is something that you would bring forward to your representative or your senator and say, I have a problem with this agency. I believe that this is happening. And then we as representatives or the senators will take that forward to the head of the agency. And if there's a problem, we'll work through the governor's office and the attorney general's office if necessary. So there are certainly times when the average person believes that an agency is not serving them in the way they want, and everybody has their opinion, of course. So it does happen, and I think that we have a really solid way of managing that.
This is the final one for me. Now, with all the powers that the governor has, in the case where a governor comes in as a governor of his state, then he's not working according to what the constitution of that state says. What action do you as legislation has to take against him?
Well, as an elected official, the governor has won his seat. However, we can, if it was an egregious enough, well, let's start with a minor one. If he's doing something minor that is disagreed with, the first people that would stop him is the check and balance of the executive council. That's the 5 people that are elected that control large budget items that the governor may approve. They have to also approve it. Appointments of personnel to the different departments, they have to approve that. They serve as the first check and balance on the governor abusing his power. And we're one of the only states that has that executive council. It's a holdover from our colonial days when the King of England used to appoint our governor, and the colonists here in New Hampshire didn't like the way the governor was working. And we were going to rebel. And in order to calm us down, the king said, I will let you have an executive council of people from your own community that serve as a check and balance against my governor if you don't have a rebellion. And we've kept that even in the days of elections now. where we have an elected executive council that serves as a check and a balance against the governor's direct immediate power. The other thing is the governor's reelected every 2 years. So if he screwed up bad enough, he would not get reelected in 2 years. In some states, the governor's elected for 6 years. Well, that's a long time to be in there if he's abusing his power. 2 years, it's very easy to turn it over and get rid of him. And then we always have the ability to impeach. If both the House and the Senate agree in great enough numbers, we can run an impeachment. Does that cover everything?
Pour revenir un peu en ce que j'ai à poser comme question, est-ce que il arrive des fois où vous avez des vacances de vacances, donc des vacances parlementaires, quoi. Donc, des pauses, oui. Parce que chez nous souvent, les représentants du peuple, ils ont toujours eu des vacances. Ils stoppent les activités au niveau de leur chambre. Et puis, ils descendent jusqu'à la base, jusque dans les villages pour s'acquérir de la vie des citoyens. Est-ce que les règles qu'ils ont eu à voter sont appliquées? Est-ce que, par exemple, l'administrateur de tel coin, est-ce qu'il est en train d'appliquer la politique du gouvernement? Tout. Alors, je voulais savoir si ici, chez vous, ça se fait aussi comme ça. Est-ce qu'il y a des fois où vous avez de telles vacances pour descendre dans des villes éloignées, chacun là où il a été voté?
Good question. So Carol, that was basically wondering if we ever take a recess where we can go back to our communities to find out how things are being applied and how things are working there so we can get the input from the people. And first I'll say, unlike the federal situation where people go down to Washington and they may stay down there and not come back, here in New Hampshire, we're a small enough state that the furthest someone has to drive to be here is 3 hours. And people live in that community. When we come up here, we come up usually for our session once a week from January to June. From June through the end of the year, we're mostly off. And we're back in our communities for that period of time. We do most all of our work from January through June. In addition, every single day that we're not here, we're in our home community. And we're not here every day, 5 days a week, from January to June. This committee doesn't meet as frequently, so we will be up here a few Tuesdays between January and June for our committee hearings, and we'll spend all day doing them. And then we go home. And almost every Thursday, we're here to be in the House session in the big hall with all 400 people voting on the bills that have been coming out of committees or have been coming to us from the Senate. Aside from those days, we're home. Some committees have more time up here in Concord. Finance is here a lot, but they still go home every night to their communities. And they still have from June through the end of the year that they live in that community and they get to hear directly from people all that time that they're there. Replet.
What Representative Spillane is correct, but remember, we have to stay in our communities because for $200 a year, if you're not retired, we all have full-time jobs and families and churches and things we're involved with in our communities.
And then also in the electronic world, our constituents are never far from our cell phones on email or texting us. They all have our phone numbers to call us. So there are many means for our constituents to communicate with us and express their displeasure if they want to.
Alors, subsidiairement à cette question, je m'excuse un peu. Vous percevez $100, c'est combien? 100 par an? Par an ou 200? Ce sont les émoluments. Alors, est-ce que ici aux États-Unis, est-ce qu'il y a cumul demandants? Parce qu'avec $100, comment vous vivez? Est-ce que vous cumulez, vous avez les cumuls demandants, donc vous pouvez être représentant et puis vous occupez une autre fonction de l'administration ou comment? Je veux savoir un peu cela.
So most of us have another elected position or so that we serve, but it's not one that gets paid. For example, Representative Brown here is a selectman in his town. Do you get any compensation there?
Yeah, I get more than here.
Um,
Yes, I do.
But I have a full-time day job. I'm a senior technical writer for an industrial tools company that does non-destructive inspection and X-ray and ultrasonic inspections on things like aircraft and windmills and things like that. That's what I do full-time, and that's how I make my money. The $100 a year is in our Constitution. It'll not get changed anytime soon. We don't vote ourselves a raise like other states do because it's in our Constitution. That means we need to have a majority of the House, three-fifths of the House has to vote to pass an amendment to our Constitution to change what we get paid. Then a 3/5 of the Senate has to do the same. And then it's got to go on the ballot so that 3/5 of the people in the state vote for it on their election. And then it could happen. But it's a very high bar, and it was set way, way back when $100 a year was actually compensation for a farmer to come down here and miss some of his crops being pulled in. Now it's more of a thing of pride for us because we work because we want to do the work, not because we're getting paid to do it. And that's why we consider ourselves a volunteer legislature. It's another reason we don't need the term limits, right? At $100 a year, how long are you going to put up with it before you're like, all right, I'm done. I had my fill and I'm going to go back to my day job and whatnot. So it keeps us from needing term limits. Nobody's a career politician. And yes, you can have other elected positions. There are some qualifications for that because you can't have a conflicting one. There's areas of conflicted interest, such as I could not be a senator and a representative at the same time. I could not run for governor and senator or representative at the same time. I could not be the director of one of the departments and a representative at the same time. There are some areas where you can't be both, but in most cases, everybody's either retired from their work and they're doing this because they're bored at home and they want to come up and do something in Concord that helps out the state, or they've got another job. And I've got business cards for everybody here, by the way, from myself.
To that a little bit. I would add to that answer that there are those that say the New Hampshire legislature should be paid more because it tends to be an old person's legislature, because we are many of us are retired, or some of many folks like the chairman have the option to cut out a little bit from work and change the work schedule. But yes, there are definitely those that believe if we were paid more, that it would be a younger legislature and it would allow more people to take part in the process. But I think there is a great deal of pride in the fact that we are volunteers and that we are doing this for the greater good.
I know that we're coming close to the end, but we do have a very quick question from Mr. Clovis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I need I need to know if you have a national marine fisheries service inside New Hampshire state.
National Marine Fisheries Service within the state?
Yeah.
We have connections to the National
Yeah.
Marine Fisheries, but that's through our Fish and Game Department. We don't actually have an office of National Marine Fisheries here.
Okay.
We have also some members of the fishing community on our seacoast that sit on the North Atlantic Marine Fisheries Council as advisors for what's good for New Hampshire. And they are fishermen who have either retired or are current fishermen. So they have the best interest of the industry of the fishermen in mind when they're talking with them. Of course, Fish and Game is going to be representing our biological diversity and sustainability of our species along the seacoast, and the recreational fishermen more than the commercial fishermen that the fisherman that sits on the council would. So I don't know where they're headquartered, probably out of Boston, right? I think that their main office for the North Atlantic Marine Fisheries Coalition or Council is out of Boston, Mass, which is just about an hour south of here.
I have a slightly unrelated comment. Our Fish and Game Department has many of the similar agencies across the country created a television show which shows you how the law enforcement officers go around the state and do their business. It's you can see them on YouTube. It's called Northwoods Law. It's really interesting to see how the enforcement officers deal with the public and the types of things that they have to manage on a day-to-day basis. I think, and one other thing we didn't talk about real quick is that our Fish and Game Department's also responsible for search and rescue when people are lost on the mountaintops and that type of thing.
Yeah, they if anybody has any questions about how the law enforcement aspect works, that's a great show to pick up on YouTube if you go out and look at it. If you look at Northwoods Law, you'll see that's us. And that's our guys out in the field, checking licenses, doing a rescue, dealing with poachers, all of that. Rep. Ouellette.
Our Fish and Game Department is really unique and a lot of times innovative. In the last few years, they've really helped fishermen along the coast develop an oyster farm and an oyster business that never existed, which is very interesting. 50 years ago, there were relatively no moose in New Hampshire. We have a very healthy moose population now that they've even had a hunting season. Again, when I was a young man, there was no turkeys in New Hampshire. They made a deal with the state of West Virginia. West Virginia had a problem with porcupines overrunning their territory. New Hampshire has an animal called a fisher up here that eats porcupines. We switched, traded them, fishers for turkeys. Now we've got a very healthy turkey population here. Very innovative in a lot of their thoughts.
Do we have any other final questions? Because I was told to let people know we're starting to run out of time.
Yeah, I would like. My name is Yunusa Abusuka. I'm from Cameroon, and in the name of the group, I would like to thank you for hosting us today, and also for taking your time to share with us how the rules and regulations are put in place in the New Hampshire to ensure a good management of fishing and fishing-related activity in the States. And in that regard, I have a special request. I would like to know if it is possible to have a copy of the law in order to see what can be applied in our respective countries based in our respective contexts from the regulations that are implemented here in the States. Yeah, once again, thank you for having us and for taking your time to share with us all of this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I actually was going to ask our committee clerk if we had copies. I'd like to get you at least one per country that you can share, if I can.
Thank you so much.
I know that several of my members were given some this year that they didn't pick up, so we might have some extras. But I don't think the box is still in the office. Do you know if the whole box full of them was in there? I'll see if we can get a copy, and if we can't get this year's copy, I'll at least get you the one from last year before it was updated.
Yeah, sure. Thanks.
And how many copies do we need? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7?
7 visitors.
Yeah, but how many individual countries? If we had to do just countries,
yeah,
6.
in that case, yes.
Okay, so 6 or 7. I'll try to get the 7. If we've only got to squeeze out 1 extra, that's fine. All right. Anybody else have anything from the committee? I want to thank you all for coming, and I think it's fantastic to be able to share like this. I was really happy to hear a lot of questions that I could answer that had to do with how things work legislatively. I was a little concerned at first that we might not be able to discuss too much of what might impact your country as far as fishery poaching and things, because we don't have that same type of a situation here. But it seems like we've been able to provide information to a lot of different questions that I found really enlightening.
I would echo that. You're so welcome, and it's quite amazing to have you all here. It's been a distinct pleasure to be here. I don't live too far from where you're going to be tomorrow at the New Hampton Fish Hatchery, and maybe I will come by and meet you there and listen to their presentation as well. But thank you all so very much for being here.
And again, thank you. I mean, I think these type of sharing agreements work out very well for both of us. We learn as much from you as you learn from us. And we really appreciate you taking the time to come all this way to see us.
Thank you and safe travels.
Thank you.